This has been organized by Philbricks Strategic Studies, a think tank. We are all here to discuss a very hot, important international topic. It's called AUKUS. I don't know how to pronounce it. If there's a mistake, please correct me. It's a new thing. It's called AUKUS. Its impact on the Philippines and ASEAN. Will the Philippines be a factor for peace and prosperity here in our region and the world? Or will our place be used to trigger any tension or possible future wars? Let us discuss this topic today. We have with us, of course, 3 speakers, and then we have 4 reactors. We'll start by requesting all the speakers to give their opening statements. I'd like to request the opening statement not to please exceed 10 minutes because we expect a lot of questions from the audience, our media friends, and we have some people, various people from the academe, top professors. So let's start the ball rolling with the opening statement from Mr. Herman Laurel of Philbricks Strategic Studies, also radio host and analyst. Mr. Laurel, for your opening statement.
Yes, magandang araw, magandang umaga po sa lahat. Good morning to our foreign media representatives now joining us. I'm going to read parts of the position paper that the Philippine BRICS Strategic Studies Group, the think tank on the geopolitical matters and the Philippine-China relations has issued. And this has been quoted extensively by Global Times just this morning. It came out, and we were engaged with the other international media. We were interviewed also on this matter. Let me read the more important parts, and I have my timer in front of me. The focus of the Asia-Pacific region, particularly ASEAN with China, had been surmounting the COVID-19 crisis and preparing for the post-pandemic economic recovery. Geopolitics had been set aside as all issues amongst the regional partners have been resolved through dialogue and negotiations. Even relations between the superpowers were easing as President Joe Biden phoned President Xi Jinping early September, which ended in a conciliatory tone. Out of the blue, on September 16, 2021, the calm and tranquility of the region and global situation was rocked by Cold War actions and rhetoric, again from a new defense alliance called AUKUS that carried with it a contract for 8 nuclear submarines for Australia. And the contract was stolen from under the French. East and West had been simultaneously upset by the AUKUS alliance and deal. Of ASEAN's major South China Sea stakeholders, 2 spoke up against the AUKUS, expressing concern over the arms race it will surely drive. Indonesia's Jokowi Widodo and Singapore's Lee Hsien Loong expressed a degree of wariness, while the rest kept a neutral silence, except the Philippine Secretary Teodoro Locsin, with a convoluted, quote, balance of power, unquote, mumbo-jumbo, justifying the phoning support for the destabilizing AUKUS, flouting the overwhelming sentiment of the ASEAN members. Locsin claims, quote, enhancement of a near-abroad allies' ability to project power should keep the balance rather than destabilize, unquote, the situation. He is either blind or simply insensitive to the immediate impact of the AUKUS, as ASEAN expresses deep anxiety, and France with Europe expressed fury over the AUKUS, quote, betrayal, unquote, and China has immediately declared Australia, unquote, adversary, unquote, while charging the AUKUS as, quote, irresponsible and provocative, both in quotes. Malaysian elder statesman Mahathir Mohamad has declared that the AUKUS Defense Alliance has escalated the risk of armed conflict in the region, unquote. Malaysian Defense Minister Hishamuddin Hussein quickly planned a China visit to hold consultations with counterparts there about the AUKUS pact. Locsin has set up the Philippines to be a laughingstock on this AUKUS issue, with China charging Locsin for quote-unquote ignorance, and non-US portraying Locsin, non-US media portraying Locsin as a usurper of ASEAN's voice. The AUKUS is justified by Western sources as a mere business project, and ASEAN and China are overreacting. The US-UK defense industry stealthily grabbed the French contract to replace in an income stream or income streams from the Afghanistan and Middle East conflicts the US is withdrawing from. On the other hand, this must be seen in the context of quote unquote Asia pivot, moving 60% of US military forces to quote unquote again contain Asia's rise. And I use Asia, not China's rise, but Asia's rise, because we are all rising with China. Certainly not just China and the heightened US militarization of the Asia Pacific. I have 2 more minutes. Locsin's misreading shines through in his statement, quote, absent actual presence of nuclear weapons, we cannot infer violations of the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty. The issue, if he studied it, is nuclear submarines are fueled with quote unquote enriched uranium, which can be quickly converted to weapons use. This is the problem bedeviling the deal now. It will constitute violations of the ASEAN Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality, ZOCPAM, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. We call on the Duterte administration to take action to rectify the serious error of Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin and restore ASEAN consensus on the issue of the AUKUS and its nuclear submarine deal, assuage the sensibilities of our ASEAN neighbors and quote unquote comprehensive strategic cooperation partner, China. Uh, Restore calm and balance to the Asia Pacific and denounce the AUKUS as an instrument of quote unquote Cold War escalation and containment of the rise of Asia. That's our official position paper. Back to you,
Thank
Wilson.
you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Herman Laurel. You have actually less than 10 minutes. Thank you very much for your opening statement. Next, we'd like to invite one of the top-notch intellectuals and geopolitics analysts in the country today, University of the Philippines professor and policy director of Center for People Empowerment in Governance, or the CENTEG think tank. It's a nationalist think tank. Professor Bobby Tuazon to give us his opening statement. Professor Bobby Tuazon. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Naka-unmute ako kanina eh.
Ay, thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Willie. Good morning, Senator Nikki.
Morning.
Good morning. I see Mentong, General Victor Corpus. Vic, how are you? And others, no? Jed Rabena, Professor Jed Rabena. I will be speaking, Willie, as Director for Policy Studies, not Director, but Director for Policy
Yes.
Studies of CENTEC.
Thank
May
you.
pagkakaiba yung dalawang,
Yes. Thank you.
dalawang functions na yun.
Yes.
To avoid repeating what Mentong had already said very accurately and eloquently, I'll just center on certain points. Indeed, this AUKUS military alliance, a new military alliance, and the new arms deal that was secretly negotiated, a stab in the back of France, as Macron said. First of all, I see that this new development has many interlocking issues, but I don't need to dwell with many of them. The first issue is that the arms deal, the new arms deal that favors Australia, in terms of equipping Australia, supplying Australia with new submarines, nuclear-powered submarines, which has the potential of developing the capability of arming it with nuclear weapons. So hindi lang ito nuclear power, kundi nuclear weapons capability is against international law. It is against international law because it is against the comprehensive ban treaty on nuclear weapons, not to develop nuclear weapons, and also the non-proliferation treaty, both of which were signed a few decades ago. Closer at home, this new arms deal is in contravention of the ZOPFAN, no? The Treaty of Southeast Asia, declaring Southeast Asia as a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, and prohibiting the manufacture and proliferation of nuclear weapons in the at least in the Southeast Asian region. So it is in direct violation. So I was wondering why Secretary Locsin would issued a statement a few days ago favoring the AUKUS military alliance and the arms deal. No? So that's one point. The second point that I would like to add is that indeed it will trigger a new arms race, not only in the region but throughout the world. No? There's a new arms race, and this, in fact, signifies that a new type of Cold War has already begun. A Cold War that aims to target China. The aim of the arms deal and the AUKUS, although they did mention the name explicitly, is obviously China. And as some Southeast Asian nations said, like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, and some scholars who reacted to this new development, it will not deter China from, defending itself against the new Cold War by possibly developing new arms, including nuclear arms for defensive purposes. So that is the result of this irresponsible AUKUS treaty and arms deal. Why is China the target of this new military alliance and a new arms deal? I think this is nothing new because China has been the target of the US and its Western allies since, I think, the 1990s, and more so in the last 10 years, when China began to rise as the second largest economic power, together with its developing its military capability commensurate to its economic capacity or economic capability. Why is China being targeted? I think let us make clear that China, of course, because of the rise of China, this is panicking, causing panic not only to the US but also to its Western allies. It is posing challenge to the global hegemony of the US. Even if China has reiterated quite several times that it has no intention or ambition of replacing the US as the global hegemon, which I believe so. So this is quite alarming, especially to us Filipinos. It is alarming to Southeast Asia. This new Cold War is alarming, and This is the reason why I think I'll just conclude my opening. This is the reason why we need to revisit or review the Visiting Forces Agreement. You know that we have a Visiting Forces Agreement which is controversial not only with the US, but also with Australia, called SOFVA, SOFVA, or Status of Visiting Forces Agreement with Australia, which was signed by the two countries back in 2007, ratified, I think, 5 years later by the Philippine Senate. Thus, we ourselves bear the burden, which is also faced by China, of being encircled by this new Cold War, being threatened by this proliferation of nuclear weapons in our region. So it's about time that we speak up. It's about time that we review. We come out with a strong voice against this new Cold War, because it will affect our own development when what we desire, together with our ASEAN member countries, is peace and development. We don't need new threats. We don't need new dangers. We need to be at peace. Just leave us alone, because we want to develop our country. We are in the midst of pandemic. We haven't recovered. We are still faced with the raging pandemic, I think, for another 2 years. Okay, so that's my concluding remark, Willie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Bobby Tuazon, for your very, very thought-provoking, enlightened analysis about this controversial AUKUS. Thank you very much. Later on, the people, the media, and the intellectuals will ask you more questions. Next, we'd like to invite for the opening statement nationalist, former General Victor Corpus, very good geopolitics analyst and patriot. General Victor Corpus, for your opening statement. The legendary General Victor Corpus will share with us his thoughts about AUKUS.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, General.
For my opening statement, I would like to focus on the military implications of AUKUS and the possible China response. The three leaders of Australia, UK, and US mentioned in their announcement of the of the establishment of AUKUS that they will supply nuclear submarines to Australia, but minus the nuclear warheads or nuclear missiles. This promise seems hard to believe, because it's like buying a Ferrari or a Lamborghini to use it as a taxi cab. Only a fool will do that. And China, because this is directed at China, Chinese leaders will not be that stupid to believe the promise of these three leaders of AUKUS. So I would like to give you an idea of what a nuclear submarines can is capable of. Okay, if we take the example of the U.S. Ohio class submarine, one submarine can carry a total of 154 Tomahawk cruise missile that has a range of 2,500 kilometers. And each warhead carried by one missile is 20 kilotons. That is more than 10 times more powerful than the bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. That's 10 times more. So if you have, they mentioned giving Australia 8 nuclear submarines. That will come to a total of 1,232 nuclear warheads capable of destroying 1,232 Chinese cities from 2,500 kilometers away. So if you are China, that capability is enough to put an end to the entire Chinese nation and civilization within minutes or within hours, if not minutes. Especially now that US is developing hypersonic missile capabilities wherein missiles can travel at up to 20 times or 25 times the speed of sound. So with that capability, we cannot expect China to do nothing. China will consider this move by AUKUS as a first strike on the strategic level that requires appropriate response. So what could be the response of China? As we all know that China now is called the factory of the world. They have a factory, for instance, in Huludu that can manufacture nuclear submarines 6 units at a time. So if Australia will start, they said that they will start manufacturing submarines in Adelaide. If Australia will manufacture one submarine, in the same period of time, China will have 6 of the same kind. So if the total is 8, by the time that those 8 submarines are produced, China would have produced 48. So if those 8 submarines will be deployed around China or in the South China Sea and East China Sea, with 48 submarines, China can deploy 12 or more than 12 nuclear submarines each on the shores of the United States, UK, and Australia. So that will be the result of the arms race if this foolish plan is pushed through. So, but China can retaliate or respond not only militarily but also economically. For instance, they can hasten the dead dollarization of the US dollar by hastening the internationalization of the digital renminbi or the digital yuan through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and then later on throughout the 160 countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. This will cause the collapse of the dollar and eventually the collapse of the entire US economy. They can also, since they control 90% of rare earth oxides production, which are needed in all electronic gadgets, military or civilian, especially now that they are working with, they are developing the #1 developer of Afghanistan. Afghanistan holds one of the richest deposits of rare earth. If the deposits of Afghanistan in rare earth is combined with the capability of China to process rare earth into usable oxides, then that 90% control of China now will even increase even further. And if China stops the export of rare earth to Australia, UK, and US, that will have a tremendous impact on their economy. Although we know that Australia and the United States have huge deposits of rare earth, but the problem is they cannot turn them into usable oxides. So that will be, I think, the response to this foolish plan of Australia, UK, and US to start an arms race in this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very thought-provoking and interesting and very informative opening statement, General Victor Corpus. Next, we'd like to invite 4 distinguished reactors to respond and react to the opening statements and to the issue of AUKUS, its impact on the Philippines and ASEAN. Let us start first with one of the most respected leaders in the Philippines, a very enlightened analyst, and also not many people know she is also a very accomplished educator, former Senator Nikki Coseteng, for your reactions.
Thank you, Wilson. Good morning to everyone. When I first heard about the AUKUS, the first feeling that I had was one of great fear and anxiety, on top of the current fear and anxiety that we're feeling because of the pandemic, this COVID pandemic. And as we discuss it, even with friends, seems like we're discussing toys. Seems like we're discussing things that are so far-fetched, that are like subject matter for games. Doesn't seem like we're talking about lives. We're talking about futures. Future is already uncertain, as some economists predict that it will take 5 to 10 years to even recover from this pandemic as it is. So this is the last thing we need. And earlier it was mentioned that there's some kind of conciliatory maybe a reaction from the White House today with China. Maybe at that particular time, there was some flash of intelligence and some flash of brilliance, because if the United States knows what's good for them, that should be the rightful step going forward. Another point where fear is actually should be actually felt is really because the minute the UK and the US, is mentioned, I always associated it with massive killings, massive intervention in politics. If you like go back to even Israel's history, India and Pakistan, the African colonies, the Americas, etc. You can the line. I mean, the list would go on and on. A litany of bloodshed, a litany of massive killings, all the way to today's massive killings. There is one mass shooting practically every day in America since 2013. You know, this is not figments of fear as figments of the imagination. You know, there are 3 robberies every 60 seconds. Every minute there's a robbery in the United States. Not to mention the food lines that they have and the homelessness problem, the unemployment issue. So you really wonder if these countries are capable of bringing about world peace, because it seems like everywhere they go, they leave a trail of millions of lives lost, livelihood, opportunities, futures, kids, men, women. These are not military personnel dead. These are massive, whether mistakenly or what they call collateral damage, our lives, collateral damage. But this is the kind of rhetoric, this is the kind of language that they want us to get used to. And that's fearsome. It's really, really hair-raising fearsome. And I'm glad that ASEAN, and I hope the Philippines continues to be a member of ASEAN and think like ASEAN. And I'm just happy to note that it's some kind of a maybe calming, for a split second, calming feeling that ASEAN saying, hey, what are you doing here? What's their business sending your ships here? This is our backyard. We're not in your backyard. I don't know, unless I'm totally, deluded into thinking that are there really Chinese ships in the Gulf of Mexico? Are they parked somewhere under San Francisco Bay? What are they doing here? That's one question. And why are we grateful? I hope that somebody will invent a missile, a warhead that says Philippines is off limits. Huwag kayo mag-target dyan, ha? Dun lang kayo sa your games are your games. Don't involve us. We don't want to die from getting hit by a nuclear warhead. And we got to wise up to all this, and we also have to wise up to the fact that these people up here in this level are talking with forked tongues. You'll now never know whether they're telling you the truth or not. They went to Iraq. The US went to Iraq supposedly because they are stockpiling weapons of mass destruction. 20 years later, they're still looking for any weapons of mass destruction. That you are looking for weapons of mass destruction, try Vietnam. Almost 6 million lives were lost in Vietnam, but because they're not white lives, who's apologizing for the 6 million dead in Vietnam? And what? The United States left with a tail between their legs, lost the war. So what was it all about? You talk about Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and name it. I was informed that there are about 500 US military bases all over the world, and they have maybe 500 food lines going on. So what's the logic? You want to promote peace, and you're dropping bombs every few minutes, and you've got hungry people of your own kind. So a nation, a country that cannot take care of its own people, you expect them to take care of the world? Wait a minute. They said that in Afghanistan, how many hundreds of thousands of civilians may have been killed, affected, or But let's go back a little further. The Philippine-American War. They treated the Filipinos like rabbits, like it's a rabbit hunt. The howling wilderness. You want that again here? And we're not thinking of what they can do in the future. We're already looking at what they have done. It's a blood trail. My dearest friends are Americans. We text each other still. They're in fear. They're in fright. So it's not a personal thing. It's not a US people. Their people are probably just as ignorant as anyone else about what their own country is doing. And if you go back to the pronouncement of all the presidents, regardless of political party, you will see that kind of aggression, that kind of hawkish, feel prevails.
Thank you very much for the very, very eloquent opening statement of former Senator Nikki Coseteng. I think nakat yung internet, but she gave us a very, very comprehensive and interesting and also very thought-provoking opening statement. By the way, she mentioned howling wilderness that was used by an American military general exactly 120 years ago, referring to what they plan to do in Samar because of Balanghiga war. That is exactly 120 years ago to this month of September in Balanghiga. Thank you very much, former Senator Nikki Coseteng. Later on, we'll come back to you and for the questions of other people. Next, we'd like to invite top educator, a lawyer, and also a medical doctor, multi-talented, brilliant analyst, Attorney Leomil Portadera of the University of San Agustin in Iloilo City for his reaction to the statements of Mr. Laurel, Professor Tuazon, and General Corpus.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
My first reaction was developed immediately after the September 15, 2021 news on the AUKUS. And this reaction was reinforced by the three opening statements of our distinguished speakers. I look back to a line in a famous play by Henry Ibsen, Enemy of the People. When people herd together, that is a sign of weakness. Imagine three supposedly major shaker and mover of the world binding together to confront an unnamed enemy, an unnamed threat to their hegemony in a virtual conference announcing the formation of this Australia, United Kingdom, and US trilateral military pact. It is also in the same play that Ibsen wrote, "He who stands alone is the strongest." Now, going to this AUKUS, in international law, every sovereign state has a right to enter into an alliance, military pact, military treaty with a co-equal sovereign state. The Philippines, as a co-equal member of the international community, cannot dictate as to who Australia, UK, or US will enter into an alliance. But we have to express concern, not necessarily welcome this balance of power strategy. Why are we going to express our concern? Because of what Professor Tuazon mentioned, we have multiple visiting forces agreement and the 1951 military defense treaty with the United States. This multiple visiting forces agreement allow state signatories with whom we entered into the VFA to assess, utilize, use, enter our territory. There is a doctrine that they want answer as to the status of the nuclear-powered vessels, which our 1987 Constitution expressly prohibits entry into our territory. So we don't ask, they don't answer. Number two, the implication of the 1951 Military Defense Treaty. There are only 8 articles, and I think if I'm right, Article 4 states that any attack on the territory of the United States and the Philippines is an attack against the other. Remember, in international law, a seacraft or an aircraft is considered as an extension of a territory of a signatory states. Are we going to be dragged into the war? Remember, pre-World War I Europe, there were overlapping military defense treaties when non-actors were eventually dragged into a war that was supposed to be the end all wars. Are we looking at that scenario for our country, for our people? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your reaction. Brilliant doctor and lawyer and Professor Leomil Aportadera. Next, we'd like to invite a very talented analyst, Professor Aaron Jed Rabena. He is research fellow of the Asia Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation, Inc., APPFI, and also an intellectual. Professor Aaron Jed Rabena for his reaction.
Thank you very much, Sir Wilson, and to everyone po. Good morning. Actually, sir, I'd just like to correct that I'm currently not with a university, so
Yes.
I'm a research fellow po, not a professor.
Yes, Mr. Fellow. Yes.
Yes, sir. So my take po on this, sir, is that with the signing of the AUKUS, I think this will certainly warrant a reaction or a response from China, because for every action, there's always a reaction. I think we have seen this, when the US announced the pivot to Asia in 2011, China responded by announcing the Belt and Road Initiative 2 years later, which was in 2013. And similarly, when the Chinese reclaimed islands in the South China Sea, the Americans responded by conducting a series of freedom of navigation operations. So this is basically the dynamics here, sir. And what I see from the possible response from China is that it will, engage also in building up its arms, especially in the maritime and the naval aspect, because seeing that the emphasis of the trilateral security partnership is on submarines, China might perceive this as these countries, preparing for a naval or a maritime warfare, something like that. So China would, I guess, certainly also need to strengthen its own maritime and naval capability. And I think these formations of alignments, strategic alignments and partnerships basically would send a message to China that, like, this is it. Maybe this is the formation of the containment strategy against them. So I think maybe that China would, as they did before, they would continue to leverage, their economic capability, so as to remind regional countries that we should stay the course of practical cooperation. So I think that is what China would want to do. And in reaction to the of some ASEAN countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and including our countries, as announced by Secretary Locsin, I think this goes to show that each ASEAN country has its own strategic culture and strategic orientation. So this is reflective of the Philippines' strategic culture, and also that of Malaysia, and Indonesia and Vietnam. And I think Vietnam was also supportive, but somehow muted in their reception of the AUKUS. So yeah, so I guess this is how the dynamics will play out. And I think two extreme scenarios might play out here, Sir Wilson. One is that the major powers could take matters into their own hands, to the disadvantage, or to the sidelining of ASEAN. Another is that the ASEAN countries might gradually be forced or indirectly be forced to choose sides going forward. So this is my take, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Aaron Jed Rabena, Research Fellow of Asia Pacific Pathways for Progress Foundation. Thank you very much, Mr. Rabena. And next, last but not the least, we have a reactor analyst, also columnist for ASEAN Post, columnist for Sovereign.ph, Miss Ana Malindog Uy.
Good afternoon to everyone. Good morning to everyone. To the panels and to the panel of speakers and reactors, media friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant morning to all. So for my reaction, I think since I'm the last one to talk or to speak, I will re-emphasize some of the points that was raised earlier, and also I will read some parts of the article that will be published. My article actually that will be published in ASEAN Post this Sunday, and it talks about AUKUS. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, AUKUS, and the U.S. pivot to Asia strategy, implications and repercussion. So, although none among the leaders of the three countries mentioned during the presentation of the trilateral military pact, obviously the defense alliance between Australia, US, and the UK is to counter not only China's growing political and economic influence in the Indo-Pacific region or in the Asia-Pacific region, but also its growing modern capabilities and military expansion. So basically, AUKUS, if you look at it in a geopolitical or strategic terms, it's actually a counterbalancing security alliance of the three I's refers to, again, UK, US, and Australia against China. Like the Quad, AUKUS is not an isolated occurrence of China baiting and provocation. To a certain extent, it is a provocation against vis-a-vis China. Just to note, in an attempt to counter China and to realize the aspiration of the US pivot to Asia strategy, the US rejuvenated Quad, or also known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which is an informal strategic dialogue that is maintained by talks between member countries like the US, Japan, Australia, and India. Similarly, AUKUS is part and parcel of the whole dynamic, structure, and arrangement of the shift in the US foreign policy from being Middle East centered to Asia Pacific focus, from war on terror to great power rivalry against China that is continuously challenging the positioning and alignment of countries in the region. All these are embedded in the so-called American pivot to Asia strategy during the administration of Obama, or they call it the U.S. Strategic Rebalance to Asia, and it was renamed in the time of Trump as the Indo-Pacific Strategy. Just to note, the U.S. Rebalance to Asia strategy has three components, as was mentioned earlier. It's diplomatic, economic, military security. Militarily, just to emphasize, the U.S. plans to a large-scale redeployment of its military power in Asia-Pacific region and to establish new and reinvigorate security alliances with its existing partners in the region, as evidenced by the successive visits of high-ranking U.S. officials in many Asian capitals. And to a certain extent, this AUKUS is in many ways a materialization of that objective, no? So, if you look at it, the overarching narrative of the U.S. Rebalance to Asia strategy is driven by the compulsion of realpolitik in contemporary times with China being identified by U.S. officials, strategic official, security and defense officials, as a revisionist power, which according to the U.S. and its Western allies would undermine autonomy of countries across the region and beyond. It's the thing here is China is being identified as number one threat to the world standing of the U.S. So like Quad, AUKUS is in essence is the U.S. response to the growing influence and power of China in the Asia Pacific region. And if you look at it in a geopolitical perspective, after decades of engagement in the Middle East and Southwest Asia, particularly the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, U.S. policymakers realized that China power and influence in the political economy of the Asia Pacific has increased to a greater extent. The balance of power in the region, crucial to American security and economy, has shifted in favor of China, which prompted a U.S. foreign policy reformulation and realignment with the ultimate goal of not only promoting U.S. interests, but to safeguard and secure U.S. survival as a global hegemon and dominant power in a unipolar international system continuously being challenged by the rise and the continuously growing economic and political influence of China in the region, but even into a superpower status, alongside the strengthening economic and military power of other contending powers like Russia and others. So what's the implication of this? One implication would be, yun nga, sinasabi kanina, that this AUKUS will probably provoke an arms race. And this arms race, if you look at the ASEAN region, goes against the idea of a nuclear-free zone or peace and a zone of freedom and neutrality in the ASEAN region. AUKUS in many ways is in conflict, no, with the purpose and intent of the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty, a treaty by ASEAN member states that is committed to preserve ASEAN region as a region free of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. Likewise, AUKUS to some degree is anathema to the ASEAN zone of peace and freedom and neutrality, which is a declaration that envisions ASEAN region free from interference from outside powers, practicing peaceful coexistence and preserving the independence and sovereignty of individual states. So AUKUS also may propel, as part of the repercussion or implication, AUKUS also may propel reverse consequence vis-a-vis containing China's military modernization and expansion. As a response to the threat and provocation posed by AUKUS to China's security and strategic positioning in the Asia-Pacific region, China, we don't know, probably may exert greater efforts to improve, enhance, and ramp up its military expansion and deterrence capabilities. Worse, other countries in the region may also be provoked to do the same. So such a scenario, in many ways, endanger the peace and stability of the ASEAN region and the wider Indo-Pacific region. Just like what Malaysian elder statesman Mahathir have said, the defense pact between the three eyes has escalated the risk of armed conflict in the region. So furthermore, the possibility for ASEAN countries like the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Singapore to be caught in the crossfire, no, and be caught in between China being the target of AUKUS, and on the other hand, US, UK, and Australia on the other are looming in the horizon. And I don't think ASEAN countries would want to be in that situation. They have been avoiding that for the longest time. Moreover, also AUKUS may threaten or may weaken the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons of 1986. Also, it has, to a certain extent, I think, shaken the transatlantic alliance between US and European countries, which is being embodied by NATO or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There are many talks in the European capitals right now, how they're going to respond to this, and if possible, NATO would be an independent alliance without US being in the picture. Likewise, European and Asian countries alike are coming to terms with the fact that nothing has changed with the US foreign policy. From Trump to Biden, it still consistently and fundamentally orbits around the notion American first. And moreover, it is also important to ask who benefits from this sale, no? The sale of submarine. No doubt, it's the industrial. It's the huge military-industrial complex of the US, and not necessarily the American people, the Britons, or even Australians. No, it's actually the US military-industrial complex, which is very huge, and it's a big part of the US economy. So to conclude, with the raging COVID-19 pandemic and the need for economies to bounce back from economic devastation caused by pandemic, what countries in Asia, like the Philippines, which is I am actually not in favor of what Secretary Locsin expressed about AUKUS now. But countries in Asia like the Philippines, what they need is not another AUKUS that might push further competition and rivalry between China and the US in the region. Rather, countries in the Asia-Pacific region must emphasize common interests, must strike a middle ground amid conflicting interests, and must seek and put together value on cooperation, maritime affairs, regional connectivity, pandemic response, climate change response, economic cooperation, and achieving the United Nations Global Sustainable Development Goals. And countries in Asia must broker a stable balance of power, not through unilateralism or singling out another country through forming a clique or a bloc like AUKUS, but through multilateralism and bilateral relations. It's strengthening bilaterals between countries like, for example, Philippines and China. So that's basically my reaction and re-emphasis of the points that has been raised earlier by our speakers and panel of reactors. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much for your very interesting, also comprehensive reactions, Ms. Ana Malindog-Uy, to this very hot, controversial topic of AUKUS. I think somebody said in the among the Western analysts, it's like a RUCUS. This is like a RUCUS in the region. Thank you very much for all your reactions, and most especially to the opening statement. There's a question here texted by some media friends. After the U.S. War on terror of the past 2 decades, which ended in very controversial withdrawal from Afghanistan, is it possible that some of the politicians in the U.S. and the West are trying to make China into a scapegoat or bogeyman for its large military industrial complex? Are they trying to demonize China and trying to use this as an excuse now to ramp up their military production and exports? Is this one of those things? Several of our speakers have mentioned this. Anybody among our speakers who would like to elaborate? Or
Yeah, if I may, Wilson, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Laurel.
Yeah, in fact, I made that point. We made that point in the Philippine BRICS Strategic Studies position paper, that this replaces the this 90 billion or more. We never know until this is finalized. $90 billion presently contract to supply the Australia with these nuclear submarines is a replacement for the income stream coming from Afghanistan for the past 20 years and the Middle East, because these were the centers of the supplies where the U.S. military industrial complex were sending its materials. So they're now desperate for a new income stream, the flow of new funds, and that is why they had to do this so quickly, and betraying their ally France, which had severe consequences for them, because they're desperate for this new income stream. So that's one part of this this equation. I'd also like to respond to one of the reactors, Professor Ravena, about Vietnam. Well, I cite this from a speech of the Vietnamese spokesman Le Tu Kung Hang, and he says the nuclear energy must be, meaning the submarine, must be developed and used for peaceful purposes and serve socio-economic development, ensuring safety for humans and environment. Well, this is diplomatic language saying we're not sure this is good for the region, very politely. So I don't think, I have several other quotes from non-government officials of Vietnam being very negative about this, including, I think I have it prepared here, Ton Nu Thi Nin, who voices Dr. Nata Legawa of Indonesia, saying that this has sidelined ASEAN in the decision-making for the region. And ASEAN has always thought that it should be consulted. No, the Americans, the UK, and Australia did not consult. This is an insult to ASEAN. A third point about Philippine political culture. That is precisely what we have to change. Why are we fawning with the Americans? And this is the greatest danger to us. Of course, people can argue we benefited economically from the Korean War, Vietnam War. Do we want that? Or do we want a real, genuine economic sovereignty and independence and developing based on just and fair economic development? So anyway, my reaction to one reaction.
Thank you, Mr. Laurel. There's a question here. Yes, General Victor Corpus.
Meron sana akong gustong idagdag dun sa...
Yes, General Victor Corpus.
Sa tingin ko, itong AUKUS did not come out of the blue.
Yes.
It is part of a of a grand strategy that was formulated way back in 2015. Remember that in 2014, the Chinese economy surpassed that of the US in terms of GDP measured in purchasing power parity. Okay? Merong doktrina ang US, yung tinatawag na Wolfowitz Doctrine, na hindi papayag ang US na may ibang bansa na mag-attain ng parity or even surpass the US economy economically, technologically, and militarily. They will launch a preventive war pagka merong magte-threaten ng ganon. Yun ang Wolfowitz Doctrine. Eh nung 2014, nilampasan na ng ng China ang ekonomiya ng US in terms of GDP, PPP, no? So the US Army at that time commissioned Rand Corporation to develop a grand strategy for the United States in order to stop China's rise. Okay? Yun ang objective nila, to stop China's rise from further surpassing US economy. Kasi sa ngayon, ahead pa yung US in terms of GDP in nominal dollar terms, no? So para mapigilan yung further rise ng China, the Rand Corporation developed a grand strategy for the United States to stop China's rise. Okay? The gist of this strategy is that the US will conduct a regional, protracted, conventional war against China. But they can only do this in a window of opportunity that starts from 2015 up to 2025. Yun yung parang closing door of opportunity nila. No? Yun ang hinahabol nila to stop China's rise within that time period. At ang plano nila is to keep it regional and conventional, hindi tutuloy sa nuclear war. Okay? So, the plan is a protracted war in this region na hindi lamang China ang maapektuhan ng ekonomiya. Ang target nila ay pababain ang ekonomiya ng China by as much as 35% ng GDP. Okay? Pero kung sabi nila, kung mapahaba pa natin to, magawa natin protracted, mas malaki ang ibababa ng ekonomiya ng China. Pero ang problema dito, pati yung because the whole region will include South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, lahat yan maapektuhan, Vietnam. The countries in ASEAN will be also affected. That is also part yung takot ng Amerika na these ASEAN countries are developing in tandem with China. So,
Yes.
palakas yung ekonomiya. So, the plan is to affect the entire region na maapektuhan yung mga adversely yung mga ekonomiya ng not only China but the neighboring countries, para ang mangingibabaw sa mundo will be North America and Europe. Sila yung eventually magdo-dominate if this strategy will succeed. Ang problema na nakikita ko doon sa ginawang plano ng RAND Corporation, they lack deep understanding of China's comprehensive national strength. No? They think that they can do a protracted war against China conventionally. Na it will not turn, they don't want it to turn nuclear dahil pag meron ng capability ngayon ng China to retaliate and destroy the entire United States. Yun din ang kinatatakot ng US. Kaya gusto nila ma-limit sa conventional war that will devastate the economies not only of China but the surrounding ASEAN countries and East Asia like Japan and South Korea. Now, ang nakikita kong kamalian itong strategy nila, they underestimated the capability of China. Okay? Ang gusto nila is protracted war. China can finish them off in less than 24 hours. Kasi ang kanilang pinagbabatayan ng lakas, they have encircled China with 400 military installations scattered around China. They think that will be an advantage to them. And so they did not consider that China can wipe out those 400 military bases surrounding China in a couple of minutes. Sa ngayon, meron nang nakalaan dyan na barrage of missiles, every single one of those military installations which can be monitored by satellites. Ganon din, yung advantage ng China ng US sa mga aircraft carrier battle groups. They have 11. No? Far outnumbering the aircraft carrier battle groups of China. But even if China does not use a single aircraft carrier battle group, they can wipe out the entire 11 aircraft carrier battle groups of US plus siguro dalawa sa UK, isa sa France. Magtulong-tulong pa sila, they can be wiped out in less than 1 hour by China's anti-ship ballistic missiles. Yun ang hindi na-consider ng itong plano ng RAND Corporation. Na kaya akala nila they can protect the war. But the war, pagka nagkaroon ng gera ngayon involving military confrontation between US and China, yung mga person ng US up to Guam will be targeted by swarms of ballistic missiles that can wipe out all surface warships of the United States and its allies and all their bases surrounding China in less than 1 hour. That is how warfare has evolved as a result of the so-called revolution in military affairs. And that, I think, was not considered by the RAND Corporation's grand strategy that they are following now. So itong AUKUS ito is only part of the grand strategy of developed by the RAND Corporation. It's called Thinking the Unthinkable.
Thank you very much.
You can access that sa YouTube.
May I add something, Willie?
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, General.
Can I add something, Willie?
Tuazon? Yes.
Yes. Just a short addendum to this current discussion. You know, the immediate takeoff point of AUKUS and the submarine deal is Afghanistan.
Yes.
They have lost the Afghanistan war, US, including the UK and other Western allies. They have lost it, of course, obviously, but they benefited from the 20-year war in Afghanistan. Who benefited from the 20-year war? The Military-Industrial Congressional Complex, MICC. It's not only MIC, but MICC. Now they have invented again or reinvented new enemies they are now targeting China yet again. No? But the main reason there is that having lost the Afghanistan war, they are now, the US is now partially pulling out from the Middle East, thinking that they have no more reason or opportunity to sell arms there. And now they are repivoting back to Asia and China. And this is where the MICC is now focusing its attention in terms of new arms sales. And you see there, of course, the immediate result of this is a new arms deal with Australia. There will be more arms deals in Asia, precisely because the new Cold War that the US has now launched will have a multiplier effect in terms of new arms sales for the MICC. So I think the immediate laser focused danger here is the military-industrial congressional complex. And they decide the foreign policy of the US. They actually decide the foreign policy of the US.
Thank you
I
very
agree.
much.
I
Very
agree.
interesting. MICC. First time I heard this phrase, military-industrial congressional complex with that additional C. Thank you very much.
Congressional complex, because many senators and congressmen are also benefiting from in terms of the national budget, the defense budget of the US now amounting to $800 billion. Most of it that goes to the military-industrial complex. And who is doing the defense budget? Of course, the senators, the American Congress. When a senator retires, they have a new job in terms of consultants, advisors, and think tankers to the military-industrial complex.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Bobby Tuazon. Miss Ana Malindog-Uy, yes.
Yeah, just to add an information as well. We have to note that the pivot to Asia strategy, which started from Obama administration around 2015 on that year, it was actually not only a response to the rise of Asia, China being at the forefront of that, and even the rise of China, but it was also launched during the time that the US was actually experiencing economic crisis, while its troop deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan was actually winding down. So yun yung time na inintroduce yan. Kaso nga lang, sabi nga ni Dr. Corpus, maraming points doon at maraming factors sa strategy na yan na hindi na factor in nila. Like for example, the growing, China is not anymore the China that we have 30 decades ago, no? It's a different China now, though it has defense capability that it will not compromise its security and its national integrity. So that's one point. On the other hand, is also the fact na actually ang ASEAN then, if you look at it, the way they react to this pivot to Asia or Indo-Pacific strategy of the US along with its allies, kasi it's not only the US that we have to think about. No? There are allies of the US who are also in agreement to a certain extent, but also ambivalent. Hindi nila makita kung paano sila lulugar din. Kasi you can see that in the Indo-Pacific, yung tinatawag ng freedom of navigation. Pumupunta sila dito sa area natin at nagna-navigate. And it's actually being pushed by the US. No? It's part of its pivot to Asia foreign policy. So, ang ASEAN din, we have to come to the fact na isipin natin na as an ASEAN, the ASEAN region has to stand up to this and has to actually voice out na the region has to maintain its stability and prosperity and peace, no? Kasi wala naman talagang gulo sa ASEAN. But nagkakaroon ka ng mga ganitong anxiety, anxiousness among leaders in ASEAN, except for Secretary Locsin, which actually welcomes this AUKUS, is precisely because this triggers not only arms race, no, but yung anxiety na anong mangyayari, saan ako lulugar. Kasi yun ang problema ng ASEAN countries, nagiging caught in between siya eh. Like the Philippines will be caught in between, no? Kasi saan ka lulugar? Like us, we are very close to we have a close relationship with the US, we have a close relationship with China as well. Pero pag dumating yung point na napipiga ka, saan ka lulugar? So AUKUS is probably for Australia, whatever they say, it's good for them, but it's not good for the region. And it's actually tama si General Corpus. It's part of the grand strategy of the US foreign policy from the very start, that it doesn't want any power, any alternative power, any country to rise up against it in terms of being a dominant power in the region and even globally. So yun yung kanyang problema. Until now, US cannot really come to terms of the fact na hindi na sila ang dominant power even in the economic and military. You have different rising powers in different regions. Russia is one, India probably be one, Brazil would be one. You know, it's a multipolar world anymore. It's not anymore a unipolar international system. But of course,
Thank you.
it's hard. May hang up pa ata ang US, no? Sa kanyang
Thank you very much.
unipolar arrangement. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ang ganda sabi mo, multipolar world. That's a very good reminder to everyone. Next, we'd like to invite Senator Nikki Coseteng to comment. But before that, we'd like to greet the political science students of Dr. Nora Legaspi, who are listening here now, participating from the Northern Iloilo Polytechnic State College in Estancia, Iloilo Province. Welcome to all the political science students and to your professor, Dr. Nora P. Legaspi. Senator Nikki Coseteng, would you like to comment or add your views to the sentiments of other people here?
It's more like a question, no? Because
Yes.
there's always this desire, the goal is to lift people out of poverty. That has been from the time we were conscious of this. It's been there. Now, the US has always said, oh, they want to preserve democracy, they want to preserve human rights, they want to, make countries rise and become wealthy, etc., etc. So why does this balance of terror, seem to be an offshoot of an impoverished country that has now surpassed? To my mind, they have surpassed. Statistics are just on paper, but to my mind, if you look at the lifestyle of the people in China compared to the lifestyle of people in America, except for those that are in the top, then that is admirable. I think it's admirable. And if China can help lift the rest of the ASEAN countries and even outside of ASEAN, if that can be of some help, why should they be punished and made to pay and we become victims of that? So there is a term. It's the Thucydides trap. That when this small country or powerless country all of a sudden overshoots or overpowers a bigger one or threatens a bigger one, this whole mess starts. So that's really the mind-boggling question. Don't we want people to rise out of poverty? And are we not gearing ourselves so that our own people and the rest of the world not become impoverished? Apparently, the United States says one thing, as I said, it's a forked tongue. They say one thing and do something else. You spend 2.7 trillion in Afghanistan, destroying everything, leaving all your aircraft, equipment, etc., war material, and then look at the way the Americans are living now. They can't even they don't even want to pay taxes. So, this is just my comment. This is my question and my comment. We want people to be lifted out of poverty. China did that for 500, 600, 700 million people in 2-3 decades. I think that deserves a gold medal. I'm not a China apologist, but just looking at it from this perspective, and from the US to drop to where it is now, they might even default on their debt next month.
Thank you for that question. Very, very good question. Very good question for everyone. Sorry for the mistake kasi I was ginugoogle ko si Dr. Nora Legaspi. She's from the students are from Western Institute of Technology, Iloilo City. Nakamali pala kasi I saw a poster of Dr. Nora Legaspi. Welcome to the political science students of Western Institute of Technology in Iloilo City. And to your professor, the talented Dr. Nora Legaspi. Thank you for that question, Senator Nikki Coseteng. By the way, her mother is from Iloilo City. So you have some affinities also. To that question, somebody texted here, can we rely on the US for its promises on what Professor Tuazon mentioned earlier, like visiting forces, EDCA, and MDT, and all this? Because due to this AUKUS, French leader Macron recently complained publicly about betrayal, treason, duplicity from its ally US. And the German foreign minister also publicly said, German foreign minister said, everyone in Europe is now asking themselves, what if this happened to us also? So, before this, in the US retreat from Afghanistan, immediate fast retreat, they did not even consult the UK, France, and they just abandoned their Afghan allies, the puppet government in Kabul. So any comment about this? There's a question here. Can we rely? Yes, General Victor Corpus.
Gusto kong mag-comment tungkol dun sa nabanggit yung EDCA at
Yes.
saka Visiting Forces Agreement.
Yes.
In this brewing rivalry between two superpowers, US and China, and knowing that the grand strategy of the United States is to wage a conventional war in this part of the world. Ang target dyan before 2025. Ito bang BFA at saka EDCA, US EDCA bases sa Pilipinas, dapat pag-isipan ng ating mga liderato kung ito ba ay sang-ayon sa ating national interest at national security. Dahil kung sakaling mag-decide ang China na bawiin nila yung kanilang Taiwan territory by force, okay, siguradong magre-react ang Amerika dyan. Magkakaroon ng military confrontation. Tiyak yan. Dahil hindi aatras ang China dyan. Pag nag-declare ng independence ang Taiwan, China will be forced to take Taiwan by force. And when the United States react, siguradong yung mga EDCA bases na yan will be the jumping boards for attacking China. And when that happens, China will be forced to respond. Kung ang pag-atake ng US sa China will be through the use of yung kanyang INF missiles, intermediate range nuclear forces. Kaya nag-withdraw ang US sa INF treaty with Russia, is to be able to deploy INF missiles in Japan, in South Korea, in the Philippines, at yung mga islands niya dyan sa Pacific and Australia. Okay? Yan ang dahilan kung bakit siya nag-withdraw sa INF treaty, so that they can position their nuclear forces in those EDCA bases. Yan dapat ang babantayan nating mga Pilipino. Dahil kung ako ang China at naglagay ka dyan ng nuclear forces na kayang abutin ang Beijing at Shanghai within 8 minutes. What do you expect me to do? That will not be much different from the Cuban Missile Crisis nung naglagay ng nuclear missiles ang Russia, ang USSR sa Cuba. Anong ginawa ng US? Sabi niya, pag hindi nyo tinanggal yan, we will hit you. Ganun din ang gagawin ng China sa atin. Bakit niya aantayin na bumagsak sa ulo nila sa Beijing at sa Shanghai yung mga nuclear missiles na yan? They will take the initiative and will hit us first. So, dapat mag-isip-isip yung ating mga military leaders at mga leaders sa gobyerno, yung bang mga EDCA bases na yan, is that in accord with our national security, with our national interest? Oh.
Thank you very much.
Yan ang tanong ko sa ating mga leaders, not only now, but yung dadating na eleksyon, yung mga uupo dyan, yun ang magiging kanilang pagdidesisyonan na yung ating interest, lahat ng Pilipino will be affected.
Napakagandang tanong ni General Victor Corpus. Very, very good and relevant question. Are these military agreements a danger to the Philippine security and to our interests, or serving other people's interests? By the way, General Victor Corpus, that was another, sinagot ninyo, that was another question. Singapore Foreign Minister in August publicly said that their country, Singapore, is going to be useful to China and to US for trade and other good things, but they will not allow their country to be used for negative agenda against other countries. Sabi ni Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan. He said that a few days before the trip of the US Vice President to Singapore to ask them to join this anti-China alliance. So, maganda yung tanong ninyo, General Victor Corpus.
Dapat ganun din tayo. At
Yes,
saka yung head ng New Zealand,
yes,
also declared that they will not allow nuclear submarines in their territorial waters. Kung
that's very good.
Kung magdadala ng nuclear submarines ang Australia dyan sa area, they don't want anything of it.
Thank you very much.
If I
Thank
may
you,
add to
General.
that,
I'd like to read a few names lang ha. Sabi ni Eloy Satinio to everyone, based on past historical performance, apparently USA cannot be trusted. Former Senator Nikki Coseteng is correct about their forked tongue. Tapos si Dr. Nora Legaspi, sabi niya, as far as I know, American citizens themselves do not support their government's military policy outside USA. Then Victor, thank you to Mr. Victor David of Senpeg for saying, may sinabi siya dito about how can there be a balance of power in this part of the world when the world's biggest superpower maintains hundreds of military bases and installations, conducts military operations and exercises with troops, warships, warplanes, missiles, and drones, thousands of kilometers from its homeland. Thank you for that, Mr. Victor David of Senpeg. Then also, may sinabi din dito I'd like to acknowledge lang, also Miss Tin Gonzalez of Today Online. She is also disturbed about this great reset by the Western powers led by the US, and especially the nuclear part of it. Mr. Laurel, sorry
Yes,
for
yes. Mabuti nabanggit ni General Victor Corpus yung New Zealand,
Yes.
And that was a shock, of course, to the Five Eyes Alliance, kasi yung New Zealand, Canada, US, UK, and Australia are part of the Five Intelligence Alliance. Ngayon, nagsalita ang New Zealand Prime Minister, si Jacinda Ardern, na hindi papayagan itong Australian submarines, nuclear submarines, na gagawin ng America at UK daw. sa mga territorial waters ng New Zealand. And that was a shock to them and to, again, that alliance. But I think that is the position the Philippines should be taking. Kung ang New Zealand, which is their ally, can say that, and we are part of ZOCPAM, we are part of the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, we are part of the ASEAN SEANW, nuclear weapons free zone, and that should be our position, not welcoming this, na tulad ng ginagawa ni Locsin. And so that's I think an important point to stress. And I don't think any other country is supporting this. Ang Singapore said it hopes it will be a contribution. It hopes, Hindi niya sinasabi ito ay mabuti. Sinasabi niya sana makatulong ito. But that's not a positive position. So the consensus of ASEAN, I want to stress that, is negative, and only one because of Locsin's statements, which sadly nakakasira ng consensus ng ating community. And we should really watch out for that.
Thank you. Miss Ana Malindog, yes.
Just quickly lang po, yung sa sinabi din ni Mentong, nasabi niya yung ASEAN, as actually being anxious, at saka yung pronouncement ni Secretary Locsin na is, to certain extent, is like welcoming this AUKUS. Actually, there is this sentiments right now among ASEAN countries and the ASEAN capitals na ASEAN should stand as one and should have that consensus.
Consensus.
The consensus and the stand na they don't agree with this new security alliance. But yun ang ina-emphasize nga ng Malaysia. That's why Malaysia is even planning to go to China for a trip to discuss all of these things. Because ASEAN countries doesn't want something like this. And they are already thinking na probably in the long run, this might really create some aggression in the region, which we don't like. But it's just that I don't understand Secretary Locsin going against the sentiments of other leaders in ASEAN, like Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore. These are strong leaders, strong countries in ASEAN, Indonesia, and even Vietnam, who has history of some kind of confrontation with China. It's not even welcoming this kind of security pact. So that's much more the case. And just to respond to the question of history, if we have to trust U.S. promises, I think we have to learn from history. Na ang dami ng mga promises ng US, nasa atin na yun para tignan, hindi naman talaga tutupad. A concrete example of that would be COVID-19 vaccine. Like for example, ano nangyari sa COVID-19 vaccine? They've been promising that they will deliver since March or April, August of last year. And then what happened? Hindi nangyari. It has to be a deal, Kailangan pang i-balandra ni President Duterte na, okay, we'll give you BFA, just give us the vaccine because we really need it. So do you really think we can trust this? The deep state of America? Of course not, it's there. So I think tama si General Corpus. We need the leaders that will be elected in the next administration has really to consider all these things like EDCA, MDT, BFA. These are things that needs to be revisited, rethink, and look at it if it really benefits the country in the long term, not only now, but long-term projection in terms of what's happening geopolitically, the realities on the ground. Yun yung kailangan natin tignan, at yung mga leaders natin na sa after 22 election has to look at this and has to consider this as very important factors. Yun po, maraming salamat.
Thank you, Miss Ana Malindog. Very good reminder about promises by the US. Ang unang pinangako yata noon si Emilio Aguinaldo. They promised to assist the Philippines to fight Spain daw for independence, and I think they did not fulfill their promise. They did not even want to the Emilio Aguinaldo soldiers to enter Intramuros and everything else. Thank you very much for those reminders, and to all the reactions and questions. We have room. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. If anyone here wants to, somebody texted here.
Senator Nico Seteng wants to respond to the question
Senator
earlier.
Nico Seteng, yes.
It was basically just about the New Zealand position.
Yes.
I recall in the 1980s, there was also some kind of this trilateral, treaty or pact. It was called the ANZUS, If you remember that, it was Australia, New Zealand, and US.
Yes.
I remember there was a member of parliament in in New Zealand by the name of Marilyn Waring. Marilyn Waring went all over New Zealand to campaign for a nuclear-free New Zealand. And she was successful, so that they pulled out of this group and declared New Zealand nuclear-free. So the position today of New Zealand is consistent with that position that they took. She was able to bring down the government, what do you call this? The position of prime minister was declared vacant at that time. Offered it to her, and I remember she said, "I don't want to be prime minister. I only want to see New Zealand nuclear free." We invited her here. She was here for a week or 2 weeks, going all over the country with us. Under Sisterhood is Global. It's an organization that's based in the States. We brought her here, and we also went to New Zealand and attended their conferences and for this particular purpose. That's why New Zealand has remained nuclear weapons free. That's consistent with this. Was in the 80s, early 80s.
Can you repeat her name again? This very
Marilyn
progressive
Waring.
leader.
Marilyn Waring.
Thank you.
Waring.
Thank you very much for remembering this good leader of New Zealand.
Yes.
You are like our equivalent here in the Philippines. Thank you for publicly voicing this progressive pro peace stance.
Wilson, can I add something?
Tuazon, yes, Professor Bobby Tuazon.
Kanina may comment si Vic David.
Yes.
He mentioned something about the balance of power. Balance of power
Nabasa
theory.
ko. Yes.
Now, that is precisely the justification or rationale mentioned in the AUKUS and in the submarine deal, that the submarine deal will bring stability to the Indo-Pacific region. But debunking that, the balance of power theory, a realist international relations theory, is already passé, no? It's already been debunked. Because as used by the global superpowers, they always prefer the balance of power principle to as long as the balance of power favors the hegemon, whether global hegemon or regional hegemon. So the balance of power theory is always in favor of whoever is the hegemonic power is there. No. Now the second point, with regard to MICC, just to add something to the MICC, that the U.S. Everybody knows here that the American empire is now in decline, right? It's now in decline, and the only power that is sustaining America is the military power. The American economy is now an arms economy. It's no longer its manufacturing power has gone down. It's no longer producing anything of significance, but only the arms. No, so that's the which means to say that is the bigger danger in the world, because when a country acts and behaves militarily, that already brings a catastrophe to any area where they want to exercise that. I think we should think about that now and in the future.
Yeah. Wilson,
thank you very much,
Wilson,
Professor Bobby Tuazon, for that reminder.
Wilson,
Mr. Laurel?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Herman Laurel.
Po to, kaya I'm coming in dahil napag-usapan ng balance of power, and that is of course discussed in the political science school, international relations classes and so on. But nasanay ang maraming tao to discuss in terms of that balance of power, which often naman is misinterpreted, and tama si at mabuti na paliwanag po, na-clarify po ni Professor Tuazon. Now, anong dapat na framework ng mundo? And that is what China and Russia has been repeating for the past 20 years. Yung konsepto ng multipolar world. May mga
Yeah.
superpowers nga. Pero dahil nga in the nuclear age, hindi na pwedeng maggera ang mga superpowers. Maging kontento na lang to be in their own sphere of influence, take care of their own backyard, make sure that there is prosperity in their own backyard. Huwag na pong maghangad na manakop pa ng at maging king of the road, king of the world. That is what the US is in its mind, and that's their problem. They have this psychological problem with becoming a normal regional power. So the multipolar world is what should be taught in school. Yun ang dito sa Asia, sama-sama tayo dahil because we're all neighbors, kahit na may powerful, mayroong weak, ayaw natin ng gulo kasi sino magnanais na magkaroon ng sunog sa subdivision na tatamaan din ako. Yung isang subdivision dun sa North America, gusto ang mga sunog sa iba't ibang mga lugar. And this is part of their defense theory ng Estados Unidos. Never to have a war near on their own borders, but to create wars outside their borders para hindi na lumapit sa kanila. Ganyan po. And I think it's time that our Filipino people understand that we must take care of our region, and we're the only ones concerned about its welfare, hindi yung mga tagalabas. Yun lang po.
Thank you very much. Ang ganda sinabi ni Mr. Laurel. And thank you to Professor Tuazon for reminding us about the mistaken notion about this balance of power mentioned by Secretary Locsin. I think the Western powers, especially US, is more concerned about their balance sheet for their military sales. Kasi tama si Professor Bobby Tuazon, the only thing they are producing now are arms yata. They're selling to both sides. They're selling to Israel, they're selling to the Saudis and UAE and all sides. I would like to mention some comments here by our audience here. Attorney Nixon Yao said, try asking ordinary workers in the US and China in general about their experiences about pro-US colonial influence. Tapos sabi niya, unfortunately, the mainstream media daw are not very objective about these things, and we should help balance and change the mindset of most of our Filipino countrymen for a more nationalistic mindset like those of our speakers and reactors. And Mr. Joaquin Ko also commented, Professor Tuazon and the other speakers are correct. US weapon suppliers want the world to have more conflicts so they could export and sell their weapons more. And Mr. Victor David of Senpeg said to everyone, the late Senator Claro M. Recto warned that US bases in the Philippines were magnets for possible attacks. And US troops and war materials in the Philippines under the BFA are the new magnets for attacks. The absence of open warfare does not always mean that there is balance of power. Thank you for this comment from Mr. Victor David of the Senpeg think tank, of which Professor Bobby Tuazon is a leader. Thank you to everyone for all your comments and questions. Maybe we have time now for everyone to give their closing statements.
Before the closing statements,
Yes.
Wilson, I just want to inform the media and everybody else. You
Yes.
can send your email where you can send the paper of Philippine BRICS
Yes.
Strategic Studies, the paper of
General Victor Corpus and
We have two
Mr.
papers,
Herman Laurel.
and maybe the paper of Aravena. He said he's writing one, and the
Yes.
article of Ana Malindog Uy for
Yes.
ASEAN Post, I think. So
And we'd like to
anyway,
request Professor Bobby Tuazon to maybe give us a paper also kasi maganda what he just said this morning also. Even a summary. But we had on the record, maganda sinabi niya, violation of international law and everything. Thank you. Please supply please give us your email addresses because the speakers and other people here would like to email you the complete text of their statements. So don't forget, please. And the media friends, before we end, you have to please don't forget to share your home addresses. We will send you pandesal and pastries as simple gifts for humble gifts for joining this very enlightening, very thought-provoking, and very informative forum. Let us invite our speakers for their closing statements. Kanina we started with Mr. Laurel, so maybe we could start with General Corpus naman right now, and then later on si Mr. General Victor Corpus, your closing statement summarizing what you just said to all of us here. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your vast experience, your wisdom, and your patriotic sentiments. General Victor Corpus, a hero na naging movie life niya. Thank you.
Siguro yung isang statement lang. We are all living in quote-unquote very interesting times. And siguro we should stand together to fight for Philippine national interest.
Thank you very much for reminding us. Philippine national interest, that is the best guide for us. Next, we'd like to invite one of the country's best geopolitics and politics analysts, Professor Bobby Tuazon of Sept.
Thank you, Wilson. Ang masasabi ko lang ay maraming salamat uli sa pag-imbita sa amin ng Pandesal Media Forum. This has been a very enlightening discussion, and I hope this will be it will provide more steps, more discussions, especially among our friends in the media, in terms of correcting misconceived notions, distortions, and aim for truth and aim for accuracy in our media reporting. I'm saying this because I observed that many of our media establishments, this is not of course because we have many friends from the media, they are provided with a barrage of information and analysis from American think tanks, like CSIS, which is funded by the military-industrial complex, Brookings Institution, and other so-called think tanks. Most of them are actually funded by military-industrial complex, and they are in the front line of attacking China. So thank you again, Wilson.
Thank you very much, Professor Bobby Tuazon of the nationalistic Senpeg think tank. Yun, totoong think tank yan, and very pro-Philippines and pro-peace, Professor Bobby Tuazon. Next, we'd like to invite Field Bricks Strategic Studies Director Herman Laurel for his closing statement.
I think yung pangalan po ng aming institution, the studies group, Philippine BRICS Strategic Studies, embodies our vision and what we would like to share with our Filipino people, 110 million, down to the grassroots level if we are assisted by our media networks. Na tayo ay nasa mundo na marami ng power centers, and Asia is the rising power center. Wala naman tayong ambisyon na mangibabaw sa iba. But by the same token, by the same logic, ayaw din natin yung mga iba galing sa labas na napakalayo, yung kanilang mga kagamitang panggera ay dinadala po dito. I think that is a state of mind that I'd like to share. I'd like our people to share, and so that our region will finally fulfill its dream of prosperity and enduring peace. Yun po lang. Thank you.
Once again, thank you very much to all our speakers. And also thank you to our distinguished, very enlightened reactors, former Senator Nikki Coseteng, Attorney Leomil Aportadera, our research fellow Aaron Jed Rabena, columnist Ana Malindog-Uy, and of course Herman Laurel, Professor Bobby Tuazon, General Victor Corpus. Thank you. Let us continue to please share our good ideas and the truth about not balance of power, but balance hopefully of peace, progress, and more trade in ASEAN and the Philippines. Thank you to everyone. Thank you also to all the participants, especially hindi ko na mention, Mr. Peter Lavinia of Davao City is here, plus many others that I could not mention. Ms. Eloisa Tino, Dr. Nora Legaspi, again, thank you, Professor Nora Legaspi, and your very good students of the Western Institute of Technology in Iloilo City. Hi to all the political science students there. Hopefully, you can become future Dr. Nora Legaspis also, and Professor Bobby Tuazon. Thank you very much to everyone. Let us meet again in the future and discuss more of these issues and help the Philippines really uphold independent foreign policy and a more peaceful, progressive future for all of us. Thank you very much and keep safe. Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Please don't forget to text your address, including our speakers, Senator and Professor Bobby Tuazon. Please text me your home address. We will send you our humble pandesal and pastries as gifts. Thank you. Sorry, Attorney Leomil, nasa Iloilo, we don't have a branch there of Kamuning Bakery. We could not send to you what we owe you, plus all the others. And Ana, pakitext yung address ninyo. Professor Banlawi is here also, a very good geopolitics analyst. Next time we'll invite you again, Professor Romel Banlawi and many others who attended, especially to our media friends. Please text your addresses, home addresses. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.